Now remember this, and let us be very still with it for a moment. We are not here primarily to succeed in the human sense of the word. We are not here to master circumstances, to perfect relationships, to control outcomes, or even to manage ourselves more skillfully. All of that belongs to the surface of life. We are here for one reason only, to come into the conscious awareness of God. And until that awareness is touched, no method, no teaching, no technique, no phrase, and no discipline can ever bring us peace. The human mind believes that if it can just learn the right response, the right boundary, the right mindset, then life will finally cooperate. And so it studies, it practices, it applies. But all of this effort remains within the same realm that produces the struggle. It is the mind attempting to save itself by its own activity. Scripture calls this the arm of flesh, and we are warned plainly, "Cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm," Jeremiah 17:5. That is not a condemnation, it is a diagnosis. Now hear this clearly. The problem is not that we have been responding badly. The problem is that we have been living as responders at all. We have accepted the premise that life happens to us, that people act upon us, that events enter us, disturb us, injure us, or improve us. And having accepted that premise, we spend our days learning how to cope with it. But coping is not living in God. Coping is survival in separation. Jesus never taught coping. He never taught emotional management. He never taught reaction control. He taught one thing only: seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Matthew 6:33. Notice what is absent. He did not say, seek first better behavior, or seek first improved thinking, or seek first emotional intelligence. He said, seek the kingdom, and the kingdom, as he tells us elsewhere, is within you, Luke 17:21. Now, what is this kingdom? It is not a place. It is not a future reward. It is not an altered circumstance. The kingdom is consciousness, the awareness of God as the only presence, the only power, the only life. And until we are living from that awareness, everything we do, even our spiritual practices, are attempts to manage the world of appearances. That is why the Master could stand before storms, hatred, betrayal, injustice, and death itself without reaction. Not because he had trained himself not to feel, but because he was not living in the realm where those things possessed power. The prince of this world cometh, he said, and hath nothing in me. John 14:30. Nothing in me. That is the secret. Nothing in consciousness that could respond, react, or be hooked. Now we must be honest with ourselves, because honesty is the doorway to grace. Most of us are not living that way. We are living as reactors. We wake up reacting to memory. We go to sleep reacting to anticipation. We move through the day responding to tone, to looks, to words, to silence, to praise, to criticism. And then we wonder why peace feels fragile, why forgiveness feels difficult, why non-reaction feels impossible. We are trying to practice spiritual truth while still standing on the foundation of reaction. And so we begin again, not with a new rule, not with a new slogan, not with a new psychological insight, but with the simplest, humblest admission we can make. We are here to know God, not to use God, not to enlist God, not to ask God to fix our reactions, But to know God, Scripture does not say, acquaint thyself with better coping mechanisms and be at peace. It says, acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace. Job 22:21. Peace is not the result of improved circumstances. Peace is the natural state of consciousness that knows God. Everything else is a substitute. Now, when we hear a modern phrase such as let them, it resonates with us because somewhere deep within we are tired of reacting. We are tired of carrying the emotional weight of other people's choices. We are tired of the inner argument, the justification, the resentment, the rehearsal. And so we say, yes, let them, but unless that letting is grounded in God consciousness, it remains a human strategy, useful perhaps, but limited, temporary, and easily reversed. The infinite way never begins with behavior. It begins with being. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Not be still and fix your thoughts. Not be still and reframe your story. Be still and know. Know what? That I am God, that there is one presence, that there is one power, that there is one life, and that life is not reacting to appearances. Until this becomes our starting point, everything else is an add-on. We will try to let people be, but we will still be secretly resisting them. We will try not to judge, but judgment will continue silently in thought. We will try to forgive, but forgiveness will feel like a moral burden instead of a liberation. So we pause here deliberately. We do not rush ahead. We lay the foundation. We acknowledge the work before us is not self-improvement. It is acquaintance with God. It is the gradual yielding of consciousness from reaction to revelation. And this cannot be hurried, because grace does not respond to effort. Grace responds to surrender. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Psalm 127:1. And so we stop building with human tools. We stop trying to construct peace. We stop trying to manage non-reaction. We turn instead toward the presence, and we let God define what life is, what power is, what safety is, and what love is. That is our true starting point, and without it, nothing that follows will stand. Now, having laid the foundation, we must be willing to look honestly, very honestly, at where we have been living, not to judge ourselves, not to condemn the past, but to see clearly, because nothing can be healed that is not first seen. And so we say this gently, without drama and without shame. We have been living as reactors. That word may sound harsh at first, but it is not an accusation. It is a description. A reactor is one whose inner state is determined by outer appearance. A reactor is one who feels peace when conditions are pleasant and disturbance when conditions are unpleasant. A reactor is one whose sense of safety rises and falls with people, events, and outcomes. And this, my friends, is the normal human way of living. Scripture calls it being in the world. It calls it being carnally minded. And it tells us plainly to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Romans 8-6. Now notice, it does not say that being carnally minded is immoral. It says it is death, death to peace, death to harmony, death to freedom. Not because God punishes it, but because it has no access to grace. The carnal mind is not wicked. It is frightened. It is constantly scanning, evaluating, labeling. Is this good for me? Is that against me? What did they mean? What might happen next? And because it lives by judgment, It must always be on guard. That is why reaction feels automatic. It is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism, useful in a jungle, disastrous in consciousness. Now watch how this works in daily life. A word is spoken, and immediately there is a tightening within. A look is given, and the story begins to form. A message goes unanswered, and the mind fills in the silence. All of this happens before we have chosen anything. That is reaction. And reaction is not sinful, it is unconscious. Jesus never condemned unconsciousness. He healed it. When he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," Luke 23:34. He was not excusing behavior. He was identifying its source. They know not what they do. Reaction does not know. Reaction cannot know. It is mechanical. It is conditioned. It is inherited from generations of fear. And so when we speak of forgiveness, of non-reaction, of letting go, we must first understand that reaction is not something we eliminate by force. You cannot command the carnal mind to stop reacting any more than you can command the heart to stop beating. Reaction subsides only when consciousness shifts to a higher ground. This is why all human attempts to be calm, stay neutral, or let them eventually fail. They are efforts to discipline reaction while still living in the realm that produces it. It is like trying to still the waves without leaving the storm. Now let us be very clear, because this is important. Reaction is not caused by people. Reaction is not caused by circumstances. Reaction is caused by belief in separation from God. The moment you believe that something outside you has power to define your inner state, the reaction is inevitable. That belief may be unconscious, but it governs the entire human experience. Scripture states this without apology. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Psalm 27:1. Notice it does not say, the Lord will eventually become my light. It says is, and yet fear persists, not because the Lord is absent, but because consciousness is divided. One part says God is, and another part says yes, but look at this. Now this divided consciousness is the root of reaction. We say God is omnipresent, but we live as though presence comes and goes. We say God is love, but we live as though love must be earned or defended. We say God is power, but we react as though power belongs to circumstances, people, institutions, and time. James describes this perfectly when he says, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. James 1-8. Double-mindedness is not confusion. It is two premises operating at once. One says God is all. The other says appearances are real, and the mind vacillates between them, never resting. Now, we must understand something very important here. God does not meet us in reaction. Grace does not enter consciousness while it is busy defending itself. Revelation does not come while the mind is rehearsing arguments. The still small voice is drowned out by commentary. This is why reaction feels so exhausting. It blocks the very thing that would restore us. The Master gave us the key, and he gave it simply. Take no thought for your life, Matthew 6:25. That does not mean become careless. It means stop living in mental reaction to appearances. Stop feeding the story. Stop granting reality to the fear, because the moment you take thought, you have already accepted the premise that life is outside God. Now hear this carefully. Reaction is not something to be fought. It is something to be outgrown. and it is outgrown only as consciousness becomes acquainted with God. That is why we began where we did. Because without God consciousness, reaction is inevitable. With God consciousness, reaction has nothing to attach to. And so we say, very simply and very gently, we have been living as reactors. We have been responding to shadows as though they were substance. We have been answering echoes as though they were voices. And none of this makes us bad. It only makes us human. But now a higher way is revealed. A way not of better reaction, but of no reaction. Not because we suppress feeling, but because we are no longer living in the realm where appearances dictate reality. We are learning slowly, patiently, to stand in that place of which the psalmist speaks. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Psalm 91:1. That secret place is not a location. It is a state of consciousness. And from that consciousness, reaction loses its authority not by effort, but by irrelevance. And this prepares us for the next unfoldment, where we take a familiar modern phrase, let them, and discover why it resonates, where it helps, and where it must be carried deeper if it is to become a doorway to spiritual freedom rather than just another human technique. Now we come to a phrase that has found its way into the modern consciousness, a phrase that many have felt as a breath of relief. Let them speak. Let them think what they think. Let them do what they do. And on the surface, this sounds like wisdom. It sounds like release. It sounds like freedom from the exhausting habit of trying to manage the world. And indeed, there is truth in it. There is a right intuition behind it, because the soul grows weary of resistance. The heart becomes tired of carrying other people's opinions, expectations, and behaviors as though they were personal assignments. And so the human mind says, enough, let them. And for a moment, there is relief. But now we must look more deeply, because every human insight, if it is not carried into spirit, becomes a stopping place, and what begins as liberation can quietly become another form of armor. You see, let them on the human level often means this: I will withdraw emotionally so I do not get hurt, or I will detach so I do not have to feel, or I will stop caring so I can remain intact. And while this may reduce immediate pain, it does not bring peace. It only rearranges the defenses. The human mind is very clever. If it cannot control, it will detach. If it cannot win, it will withdraw. But detachment is not freedom. Detachment is still reaction. It is reaction turned inward. It is still the self trying to protect itself from a world it believes has power. Now, the infinite way does not teach detachment. It teaches transcendence. It does not teach indifference. It teaches dominion. And there is a vast difference between the two. Let us be very clear here. When Jesus said, resist not evil, Matthew 5:39, he was not teaching passivity, and he was not teaching avoidance. He was revealing something much deeper, that evil is not a power to be resisted. Resistance gives reality. Resistance grants substance. Resistance says, you are real enough to fight. And so when we say let them, we must ask, what are we really letting go of? Are we letting go of control, or are we letting go of consciousness? Are we releasing judgment, or are we merely suppressing it? Are we withdrawing belief or only withdrawing engagement? Because if judgment remains silently in thought, then nothing has been let go. It has only gone underground, and whatever is hidden in consciousness still operates as law. Scripture tells us, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23-7. Not as he behaves, not as he appears, as he thinketh in his heart. And the heart here is consciousness, the deep inner acceptance of what is real, what is powerful, what is true. Now let them become spiritual only when it is not used to protect the self, but to dissolve the belief that the self needs protection at all, and that is a very different thing. On the human level, we say, let them judge me. On the spiritual level, we say, judgment has no power because God is the only presence here. On the human level, we say, let them misunderstand me. On the spiritual level, we say, understanding does not come from people. It comes from God. On the human level, we say, let them go. On the spiritual level, we say, nothing real can be lost because all life is held in God. Now notice how the emphasis shifts. We are no longer managing people. We are withdrawing belief. We are no longer bracing against behavior. We are refusing to grant it authority. And this is the hidden distinction that must be seen if let them is to become a doorway instead of a wall. Jesus spoke to this when he said, why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Matthew 7-3. He was not criticizing observation. He was exposing projection. The beam is not moral failure. The beam is belief, the belief that something outside has the power to disturb the peace of God within. Now, the human version of let them still sees the mote. It still sees the problem. It simply chooses not to engage. But the spiritual way does not stop at disengagement. It goes further. It removes the beam. It removes the belief in a second power. This is why the infinite way insists that we do not deny appearances, but we do not label them either. Denial is resistance in disguise. Affirmation, when used mentally, can also be resistance. Both are ways of dealing with appearances as though they were realities, and this keeps us bound to reaction. Instead, we are taught to acknowledge only this much. It is. Something is appearing to sense. That is all we know. And then we go within, into the silence, and we let God reveal what is true. This is where let them is transformed. We are no longer saying, let them be wrong. We are saying, I do not know what this is, and I will not pretend to know. I will not judge. I will not label. I will let God define. And now we are no longer hardening ourselves. We are softening into spirit. We are no longer withdrawing love. We are withdrawing judgment. And this is a holy thing. The Master showed us this again and again. When the woman taken in adultery was brought before him, he did not say, let them accuse. He did not say, let them be cruel. He did not detach emotionally. He stooped down and wrote in the sand. He entered silence, and from that silence came authority, not reaction, not defense, not argument. He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone, John 8-7. And one by one they left. Why? Because judgment cannot stand in the presence of consciousness that knows God. Now, this is what we are being prepared for, not a clever phrase to repeat, but a new way of being in the world, a way that does not resist, does not retreat, does not retaliate, and does not harden, a way that stands so firmly in God that appearances lose their weight. And so we take what is true in let them, and we refuse to stop there. We allow it to carry us beyond human coping into spiritual realization, beyond emotional detachment into divine indifference, not indifference to people, but indifference to appearances as powers. This brings us naturally, inevitably, to the next unfoldment, because once we see the limitation of human letting, we are ready to understand why every defense, even subtle ones, keeps us bound, and why the next step in this work is not to improve the defense, but to lay it down entirely. Now we come to a point that must be approached very carefully, because the human mind resists it, not loudly, but quietly. It resists it because it touches something. The mind is reluctant to surrender its sense of safety in having a method. Every method promises protection. Every technique offers control. Every system, no matter how gentle, gives the mind something to do so that it does not have to yield. And this is the subtle danger, not that methods are evil, but that they can quietly replace God. Scripture warns us of this again and again, though we often read past it. Some trust in chariots, and some in horses. But we will remember the name of the Lord our God. Psalm 20-7. Chariots and horses were not wicked. They were impressive. They were effective. They were reliable by human standards. And that is precisely the danger. Now, in our modern life, we do not trust in chariots and horses. We trust in techniques. We trust in phrases. We trust in emotional strategies. We trust in boundaries, detachment, reframing, and now let them. And again, let me be clear. These things may have value on the surface, but the moment we rely on them for peace, they become substitutes for God, because peace does not come from a correct response. Peace comes from correct consciousness. The human mind says, if I do this, I will be safe. The spiritual mind says, I am safe because God is. One begins with fear and seeks relief. The other begins with truth and rests. Now watch how easily a method becomes a defense. A person says something unkind, and immediately the mind reaches for the tool. Let them. And on the surface, there is relief, but underneath, there may still be judgment. They are unconscious. They are toxic. They are wrong. The tool has not removed the belief. It has only covered it with language. And what is covered in consciousness still operates. Jesus was very clear about this. He said, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones. Matthew 23:27. He was not condemning appearances. He was exposing inner states that had not been transformed. Now let us bring this home to ourselves, because this teaching is not about them, it is about us. When we use a method to protect ourselves from feeling, from vulnerability, from uncertainty, we are still living in the belief that something outside has power over us. We are just managing it more skillfully. The infinite way does not improve management. It removes the need for it. This is why Joel so often returned to the same simple statement. There is only one power, not two, not God and evil, not spirit and circumstance, not peace and disturbance. One. The belief in two powers is what creates defense. If there is something outside you that can injure you, then defense is necessary. If there is something outside you that can deprive you, then strategy is required. But if God is omnipresent, really omnipresent, then where is the enemy? Where is the danger? Where is the threat? If God be for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. Notice Paul does not say who might be against us, but we can manage it. He says who can be against us. That is not optimism. That is metaphysics. Now, the mind hears this and immediately objects, but look at the world. And yes, the world of appearances presents itself very convincingly. That is why we are not taught to deny it. Denial is another defense. Denial says, I must push this away. But truth says, this has no power to enter where God is known. The subtle danger, then, is not that we use methods, but that we stop at them, that we mistake relief for freedom, that we exchange one form of reaction for a more socially acceptable one, that we trade overt conflict for silent judgment. This is why Jesus said something that seems so severe at first glance. Except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 18:3. Converted from what? From reliance on mental structures, from the need to know, to control, to secure. A child does not live by method. A child lives by trust until trust is broken by fear. And the spiritual path is not the accumulation of better tools. It is the restoration of trust in God. Now let us look again at let them. When it is used as a method, it says, I will do this so that I am not disturbed. When it is used spiritually, it says, I no longer accept disturbance as power. The first still centers on the self. The second yields to God. This is why every true spiritual teaching eventually leads us to the same place, the laying down of defenses. Not foolishness, not recklessness, but the inner laying down of the belief that we must guard ourselves against life. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Exodus 14:14. That is not poetry. That is instruction. Hold your peace, not by clenching it, but by trusting the presence that maintains it. And now we begin to sense why non-reaction is not something we do. It is something that happens when defense is no longer necessary, when consciousness is no longer divided, when God is not an idea we believe in, but a presence we are aware of. And so we are gently being led away from methods, not by rejection, but by fulfillment. When truth is realized, methods fall away naturally, like crutches after healing. This prepares us for the next unfoldment, which is essential, because once we see the danger of defense, we must be shown the alternative. And that alternative is not passivity, not withdrawal, not indifference, but the conscious withdrawal of belief, the quiet inner act that dissolves reaction at its root. Now we are ready for the turn, the place where human insight is lifted out of the mental realm and given spiritual meaning. Because until this point, let them has been something we do. Now it must become something we are. You see, the danger is not that we withdraw. The danger is what we withdraw from. Most people, when they say let them, are withdrawing love. They are withdrawing openness. They are withdrawing warmth. They are withdrawing presence, and they call this peace. But peace is not the absence of feeling. Peace is the absence of fear. The infinite way never teaches us to love less. It teaches us to believe less, less in appearances, less in judgment, less in the power of form. And this is a very important distinction, because the moment you withdraw love, you have hardened. And hardness is not protection, it is imprisonment. Jesus never withdrew love. He withdrew belief. He withdrew the belief that sin, sickness, hatred, or death had power. That is why he could sit with sinners without contamination, touch the sick without fear, forgive without weakness, and stand silent before accusation without defense. Scripture tells us God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. 1 John 4:16. Now, notice dwelleth, not visits occasionally, not applies when convenient. Dwelleth. Love is not an emotion, it is a state of being. And to dwell in love is to dwell in God consciousness. Now, let us be very clear. When we speak of withdrawing belief, we are not pretending that human behavior is always right. We are not ignoring harm. We are not becoming naive. We are doing something far more radical. We are refusing to give spiritual authority to appearances. When someone speaks harshly, the human mind says, I am being attacked. That is belief. When someone betrays trust, the human mind says, this has power over my life. That is belief. When someone misunderstands us, the human mind says, my worth is being threatened. That is belief. And belief is the doorway through which reaction enters. Now, the spiritual form of let them says something entirely different. It says, I do not know what this appearance is. I will not label it. I will not interpret it. I will not crown it with meaning. Instead, I turn inward, not to escape, but to listen. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Isaiah 30-15. Strength does not come from pushing back. Strength comes from standing still in truth. This is where we must learn the sacred art of withholding judgment. Judgment is not moral discernment. Judgment is assigning reality. And the moment you judge, you have accepted a second power. You have said, this appearance stands alongside God as something real. The Master warned us plainly, judge not that ye be not judged. Matthew 7-1. This is not a threat, it is a law. Judgment binds the one who judges. Whatever reality you assign outwardly, you must experience inwardly. Now, to withdraw belief is to say, I see the appearance, but I do not accept it as final, as real, or as powerful. And then to do the hardest thing of all, we stop talking about it inwardly. We stop replaying it. We stop building the case. We stop rehearsing the response. This stopping is not repression. It is surrender. And in that surrender, something remarkable happens. Love does not disappear. It deepens. Compassion does not weaken. It clarifies. Boundaries do not vanish. They become clean, uncharged, free of resentment. This is why Paul could say, be angry and sin not. Ephesians 4:26. He was not endorsing anger. He was revealing that feeling may arise, but belief need not follow. Emotion can pass through consciousness without being crowned as truth. Now listen carefully. Withdrawing belief does not mean you stay where harm continues. It means you do not carry harm with you when you leave. It means you do not take the poison into your own being and call it memory or justice or self-respect. Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. Romans 12:19. This does not mean God punishes others for us. It means we are not equipped to judge reality. Judgment belongs to God because only God knows what is real. And so the spiritual let them is an act of humility. It says, I do not know. I will not decide what this means. I will not declare what this is. I will let God reveal truth. This is why prayer in this teaching is not asking. It is preparation. It is the clearing of consciousness so that truth may appear. When consciousness is filled with judgments, positive or negative, there is no room for revelation. Now, you will notice something as you practice this. When belief is withdrawn, reaction fades without effort. You are not trying to be calm. Calm is there. You are not trying to forgive. Forgiveness is natural. You are not trying to love. Love remains because it was never the problem. And here is the great secret. Love is never what hurts us. Belief is. Perfect love casteth out fear. 1 John 4:18. Not managed love, not defended love. Perfect love, the love that knows God as the only presence. So we do not withdraw love. We withdraw belief in separation. We withdraw belief in harm. We withdraw belief in a power opposed to God. And as belief dissolves, the phrase let them is no longer something we say. It becomes the natural expression of a consciousness at rest in God. Now we come to the first inner practice, and it may seem almost too simple. In fact, many will pass it by because of its simplicity. Yet I tell you plainly, this practice, faithfully lived, will dissolve more discord than years of struggle, affirmation, or argument. The practice is this. Before you say God is, you must be willing to say quietly and honestly, it is. This is where most students stumble. They wish to leap immediately into God language, into spiritual declarations, into truth statements. But truth cannot be used to cover fear. Truth must replace it. When an appearance comes before us, whether it is a harsh word, a betrayal, a sickness, a lack, a fear, the human mind rushes to label it. It calls it wrong. It calls it unjust. It calls it dangerous. And sometimes it calls it spiritual and healed before it has even been faced. But the Master never taught us to deny appearances. He taught us to see through them. When Moses stood before the burning bush, he did not first say, God is. He first stood still. He removed his shoes. He acknowledged presence before he interpreted it. And God said, I am that I am. Exodus 3:14. Not I am what you think. Not I am what you fear, but I am. So the first step in spiritual non-reaction is this sacred acknowledgement. It is. What is it? We do not say, we do not define it, we do not judge it, we do not assign meaning. We simply acknowledge that something has appeared in consciousness. This is not weakness. This is honesty. When you say it is, you are no longer fighting the appearance, and you are no longer submitting to it. You are standing with it, but without belief. You are allowing it to be seen without being crowned as reality. This is why Jesus could say, "Agree with thine adversary quickly, whiles thou art in the way with him." Matthew 5:25. Agree not in guilt, not in condemnation, but in acknowledgement. Yes, this has appeared. I see it. I do not deny that it is present. And then, only then, can consciousness relax. Resistance tightens the mind. Denial hardens it. But acknowledgement opens the door to revelation. You see, the moment you say it is, without fear, without judgment, without haste, something extraordinary happens. The mind stops racing ahead. The emotional charge begins to dissolve. The story loses momentum. And now, only now, are you ready for the second movement? God is, not as a correction, not as a weapon, but as a realization. You do not say God is instead of it is. You say God is within it is. This is why the Infinite Way insists that we do not name evil, disease, or sin as realities. We do not deny them, but we do not define them. We let God define what is appearing. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Stillness comes first. Knowing follows. Now let us be very clear. When you rush to say God is without first resting in it is, you are often using truth to escape feeling, and whatever is escaped remains unresolved. But when you face the appearance calmly and say, it is, you have already removed fear's foundation. Fear feeds on interpretation. Fear feeds on labeling. Fear feeds on imagination. When you refuse all three, fear starves. Then, when you gently rest in the awareness of God's presence, not as a thought, not as a phrase, but as a felt stillness, you may notice that nothing needs to be done. No fixing, no correcting, no sending out of thoughts, no mental labor. Truth does not struggle to be true. And often, very often, you will find that the appearance begins to fade, not because you pushed it away, but because there was no belief left to sustain it. This is what the prophet meant when he said, "The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace." Exodus 14:14. Holding your peace is not passivity, it is alignment. Now, this practice must be lived, not performed. It must be applied in traffic, in conversation, in family life, in misunderstanding, in loneliness, in temptation. Each time something arises, you pause inwardly and say, it is. Then you wait, and then, softly, without effort, God is. Not spoken aloud, not repeated, not strained, just known. And if nothing happens, if there is no immediate relief, do not judge that either. You are not practicing for results. You are practicing alignment. In patience, possess ye your souls. Luke 21:19. Over time, you will notice that fewer things disturb you, not because the world has changed, but because consciousness has been cleansed of false authority. And now, as this practice deepens, we must face the greatest obstacle of all, the habit of mental conversation. Now we come to the place where nearly all spiritual work is lost, not through sin, not through wrongdoing, but through an activity so common, so subtle, that most do not even recognize it as the source of their unrest. And that activity is mental conversation. By mental conversation, I do not mean thinking. Thinking is often necessary. I mean the inner dialogue we carry on with people who are not present, about situations that are not occurring over words that have already been spoken or may never be spoken at all. This mental conversation is the great thief of peace because it gives life, continuity, and power to appearances long after the moment has passed. You may leave the room, but the argument follows you. You may end the relationship, but the conversation continues. You may forgive outwardly, but inwardly the dialogue goes on, and so the bondage remains. The Master warned us of this when he said, "Take no thought for your life," Matthew 6:25. He was not speaking of responsible planning. He was speaking of this very activity, the taking of thought, the rehearsing, the replaying, the building of inner scenes. Every mental conversation is an attempt to control outcome. It is the human mind saying, if I can just explain this, justify this, defend this, correct this, then I will have peace. But peace never comes that way. Now, let us see what happens spiritually when we engage in mental conversation. We are not merely remembering, we are creating. Thought held and repeated becomes belief. Belief becomes experience. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7. Notice in his heart, not a passing thought, but a sustained inner acceptance. When you replay a conversation, you are not observing it, you are reliving it. And in that reliving, you are giving it a new present moment. You are keeping it alive in consciousness. Now, here is the crucial point. Nothing has power in your life except what you consent to in consciousness. People do not continue to hurt us after the moment has passed. We continue to hurt ourselves by consenting to the replay. This is why forgiveness that remains mental is incomplete. True forgiveness is not saying, "I forgive you," while continuing the inner dialogue. True forgiveness is silence. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Isaiah 55:7. Not merely his actions, his thoughts. Now, how do we stop mental conversation? This is the question that troubles many. They try to stop it by force. They argue with themselves. They replace one dialogue with another, and all of this keeps them on the same level. The infinite way does not fight mental conversation. It withdraws interest. You see, mental conversation survives only as long as it is interesting, only as long as you believe something important is at stake. The moment you realize that no spiritual reality is ever decided in thought, the conversation loses its urgency. When the inner dialogue begins, you do not suppress it, you do not condemn it, you do not analyze it, you simply become aware of it, and then you turn inward. This is where the practice of it is becomes essential. You say quietly, this is mental conversation, not with judgment, with recognition. And then without effort, you rest in the awareness of God's presence. Not to fix the situation, not to change the other person, not to produce an outcome, simply to be present with presence. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him, Habakkuk 2:20. Now notice what happens when silence enters. The dialogue has nothing to feed on. There is no argument in silence. There is no defense in silence. There is no justification in silence. Silence is not emptiness, it is fullness without form. And in that silence, the emotional charge dissolves, the memory loosens, the sense of personal involvement fades. You are no longer in the scene, you are witnessing its unreality. This is what Paul meant when he said, "We wrestle not against flesh and blood," Ephesians 6:12. The struggle is not with people. It is with belief, belief sustained through thought. Now you will discover something humbling as you practice this. Many of the conversations you replay were never spoken by the other person. They were imagined, and yet they had the same emotional impact as if they were real. This shows us that the pain was never in the event. It was in the acceptance. And here is the liberating truth. What has been accepted can be released. When mental conversation arises, you may gently say, "This has no authority," not as a declaration, but as a realization. And then you let it pass. At first, it may return many times. Do not be discouraged. You are not failing. You are uncovering habit. Each time you withdraw attention, you weaken the habit. Each time you rest in silence, you strengthen awareness. Over time, and this is certain, you will find that the conversations shorten. Then they lose feeling. Then they stop arising altogether. And what remains is not numbness, but peace. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Isaiah 26:3. Stayed, not forced. Stayed, not distracted. Now, as mental conversation fades, something else becomes possible, something most people have never experienced. Non-reaction without effort. And that is where we must go next. Now we must correct a misunderstanding that quietly undermines many sincere students. Non-reaction is not something you do. It is not a discipline. It is not self-control. It is not restraint. Non-reaction is what remains when there is no personal sense left to defend. As long as there is a me that must be justified, protected, understood, or validated, reaction is inevitable. Reaction is not a failure of will. It is the natural activity of a self that believes it is separate. This is why trying to practice non-reaction through mental effort always fails. The effort itself confirms the very self that reacts. The master never reacted not because he was trained, but because there was no personal center from which reaction could arise. The prince of this world cometh, and hath nothing in me, John 14:30, nothing to grasp, nothing to provoke, nothing to resist. Now consider this carefully. Reaction requires two things, a stimulus and a receiver. Remove the receiver, and the stimulus has no effect. This does not mean the stimulus disappears. It means it cannot land. When someone speaks unkindly and there is a me listening, reaction arises. When the same words are spoken and there is only awareness, the words pass through consciousness without attachment. I and my Father are one, John 10:30. This is not theology. It is a state of being in which there is no separate self to be injured. Now you may ask, but how do I remove the reactor? And the answer may surprise you. You do not remove it. You see through it. The personal self is not an entity. It is a pattern of belief. It survives through identification. This happened to me. This affects me. This means something about me. The moment you stop referring everything back to me, the structure collapses. This is why the Infinite Way insists that spiritual life is not improvement of the human self, but transcendence of it. If any man will come after me, let him deny himself. Matthew 16:24. Deny, not punish, not suppress, but refuse to identify as. Now here is the subtle point. Non-reaction does not mean passivity. It does not mean agreement. It does not mean tolerating harm. It means that whatever action is taken arises from clarity, not emotion. Reaction is always emotional. Action, born of spirit, is calm, precise, and free of charge. Jesus could overturn tables without hatred. He could walk away without resentment. He could speak truth without aggression. Why? Because action flowed from alignment, not from injury. The Son can do nothing of himself, but what he seeth the Father do. John 5:19. There is no personal agenda in that. Now, as you practice withdrawing belief, silencing mental conversation, and resting in awareness, you will notice something quietly astonishing. Situations that once triggered reaction no longer do, not because you are suppressing, but because there is nothing to suppress. The mind waits for the familiar surge, and it does not come. At first, this may feel strange, even unsettling. Reaction has been mistaken for aliveness. When it fades, there is a stillness that feels unfamiliar. Do not mistake this for emptiness. It is presence. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness is not absence. It is recognition. And now we come to a deeper realization. When there is no reactor, there is no enemy. What you once called opposition is revealed as misperception. What you once called attack is revealed as misunderstanding. What you once called threat is revealed as fear seeking confirmation. None of this needs to be fixed. It needs to be seen. And when it is seen, the heart softens not into vulnerability, but into strength. My strength is made perfect in weakness, 2 Corinthians 12-9. Weakness here is not frailty. It is the absence of personal force. Now, as non-reaction stabilizes, something else emerges, a quiet authority that does not assert itself. Others feel it, situations respond to it, and yet nothing is being projected. This is the authority of alignment. And this brings us to the final inner shift, the movement from letting them to letting God. Now we arrive at the point where the phrase, let them, dissolves entirely. It has served its purpose. It was a doorway, not a destination. And once we have passed through it, we discover that the real instruction was never let them at all. It was let God. As long as there is a them, there is still a subtle sense of separation. As long as there is someone to be allowed, tolerated, managed, or released, the human self is still quietly in charge. But spiritual life does not culminate in better management of others. It culminates in surrender to the one presence. Not my will, but thine be done. Luke 22:42. This is not resignation. It is liberation. To let God is to release the belief that we are the doer, the knower, the decider. It is the end of personal authorship. And this is frightening only as long as we believe that life depends on us. The human mind believes it must control in order to survive. The spiritual consciousness knows that survival was never the point. Expression was. In him we live and move and have our being. Acts 17:28. If this is true, and it is, then nothing needs to be held together by human effort. Now observe carefully. When we say let God, we are not asking God to intervene in human affairs. God does not intervene. God reveals. Intervention implies two powers, one acting upon another. Revelation reveals that there was never more than one. This is why the Infinite Way teaches that healing does not come from God doing something, but from consciousness awakening to what already is. Before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. Isaiah 65:24. God is not responding. God is being recognized. Now, what happens when you truly let God? Control falls away not as loss, but as relief. The mind no longer needs to figure things out. The heart no longer needs to brace. The will no longer needs to assert. And something subtle but powerful takes its place. Trust without object. Not trust in outcomes. Not trust in people. Not trust in circumstances. But trust in presence. This trust is not hopeful. It is not optimistic. It is grounded in the recognition that there is nothing outside of God to fear. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Psalm 23:1. This is not poetry. It is a statement of consciousness. Now notice this carefully. Letting God does not mean things always go the way the human mind prefers. It means that whatever unfolds carries no sting. Disappointment loses its poison. Delay loses its anxiety. Change loses its threat. Why? Because meaning is no longer being assigned by personal sense. This is the final release, the release of interpretation. We no longer ask, why did this happen to me? We no longer ask, what does this mean about me? We no longer ask, how will this turn out? We rest. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. Psalm 55:22. Sustain, not fix, not rearrange, but sustain. And here is the great mystery. When you stop managing life, life reveals its harmony. When you stop trying to direct the river, you discover you were already being carried. Now, as this becomes natural, forgiveness is no longer an act. Love is no longer a virtue. Peace is no longer an achievement. They are simply the atmosphere of being. And so let them fade, and what remains is a quiet knowing. There is only God. There is only presence. There is only now. I am the Lord, and there is none else. Isaiah 45:5. Now we come to where all teaching must eventually arrive, not in words, not in understanding, but in living. For truth that is not lived becomes philosophy, and philosophy has never healed a single heart. To live without labels is not a mental exercise. It is a transformation of perception. It is the gradual surrender of the habit of naming, defining, classifying, and concluding. The human mind lives by labels. It calls one thing good and another bad, one person safe and another dangerous, one moment blessed and another cursed, and then it lives inside the world it has named. But the spiritual consciousness does not live by labels. It lives by isness. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. John 7:24. And righteous judgment in the infinite way is not judgment at all. It is recognition without conclusion. Now consider what happens when you meet someone without a label. You are no longer meeting your past experience with them. You are not meeting reputation. You are not meeting memory. You are meeting presence. This is why Jesus could look upon each individual as if they were new. He did not see the adulteress. He saw the child of God. He did not see the leper. He saw wholeness obscured. He did not see the betrayer. He saw fear unredeemed. Neither do I condemn thee, John 8:11. This was not moral leniency. It was spiritual sight. Now, living without labels does not mean you ignore human facts. It means you do not grant them spiritual authority. You do not let appearances decide reality. When sickness appears, you do not label it as power. When lack appears, you do not label it as truth. When conflict appears, you do not label it as final. You acknowledge the appearance, and then you rest in God. That which is seen is temporal. That which is not seen is eternal. 2 Corinthians 4:18. Now, this way of living requires patience not with others, but with yourself. Old habits of labeling will arise. You will catch yourself judging, interpreting, reacting. Do not condemn that either. Recognition is enough. Each time you notice a label forming, you simply withdraw it. You do not replace it with a positive label. You let it dissolve into silence. And in that silence, truth reveals itself not as words, but as peace. Now, something beautiful begins to happen when labels fall away, relationships soften, conflicts lose momentum, situations resolve in unexpected ways, not because you made them happen, but because resistance has ended. This is what is meant by love your enemies, Matthew 5:44. It does not mean affection. It means seeing without labels. An enemy is simply someone we have named. When the name falls away, so does the enemy. Now, as this becomes your natural mode of being, you will notice that life feels lighter. Not easier, lighter. You carry less. You hold less. You defend less. And you trust more, not because you are trying to, but because there is nothing left to mistrust. The kingdom of God is within you, Luke 17:21, and the kingdom is not entered through effort, but through surrender. So let us end not with instruction, but with recognition. There is nothing to fix. There is nothing to battle. There is nothing to prove. There is only God revealing itself as your life, and in that revelation, judgment dissolves, forgiveness becomes unnecessary, and peace is no longer sought, it is lived. Now, there is very little left to say, because truth, when it is reached, is not something that can be carried further by words. Words may point the way, but arrival is always wordless. Up to this point, we have spoken of practices, of recognition, of withdrawing belief, of silencing mental conversation, of non-reaction, of letting God. But now even these must be released, for any method, once fulfilled, becomes an obstruction if it is held on to. The final step is always the same: rest. Not rest as inactivity, but rest as trust. Rest as the quiet assurance that nothing needs to be added to this moment for it to be complete. My presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. Exodus 33-14. Notice my presence, not explanation, not outcome, not protection, presence. When you rest in God, you are no longer watching life to see how it turns out. You are no longer measuring your progress. You are no longer checking whether peace has arrived. You simply are. And in that being, peace is revealed as what has always been. This resting is not achieved. It is allowed. It may come suddenly, or it may come gently, in brief moments at first, a pause between thoughts, a softening in the chest, a sense of being held rather than holding. Do not try to prolong it. Do not try to repeat it. Let it come and go as it will. The tide knows its own rhythm. The wind bloweth where it listeth. John 3-8. Now here is something important to understand. When you rest in God, life continues. You still speak. You still act. You still choose. But the sense of personal strain is gone. Action flows without pressure. Decisions arise without anxiety. Words come without defense. This is what it means to be led by the Spirit. As many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. Romans 8:14. There is no striving in this leading. There is no pushing. There is a quiet rightness that you recognize not by excitement, but by peace. Now, from this resting, forgiveness becomes unnecessary, not because harm is justified, but because nothing is being held. Judgment becomes impossible not because you are trying to be virtuous, but because there is nothing to judge from. Reaction fades not because you have mastered yourself, but because the self that reacted is no longer central. What remains is awareness. And awareness does not struggle. This is the state the Master lived from when he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," Luke 23:34. That was not mercy extended downward. It was clarity seeing through illusion. And now this clarity is not reserved for saints or mystics. It is the natural inheritance of anyone willing to let go of the need to control, define, and conclude. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. 2 Corinthians 6:2. Not tomorrow, not after more understanding. Now. So let us close not by summing up, but by yielding. Yield the need to react. Yield the need to judge. Yield the need to understand everything. And rest in this simple awareness. God is. And because God is, all is well. And now we come to the ending that is not an ending, but a resting place. There is nothing more to add, because nothing has been missing. There is nothing to carry forward, because truth is not something you transport. It is something you abide in. So we let all striving cease. We let every effort to understand fall away. We let every attempt to improve ourselves be gently laid down. We let every question soften into silence. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. John 14:27. This peace is not emotional calm. It is not relief because circumstances have changed. It is the peace that comes from knowing deeply, wordlessly, that God is present and that presence is sufficient. We do not ask God to go with us, for God has never left. We do not ask God to protect us, for there is nothing outside God's care. We do not ask God to bless us, for blessing is the nature of being. We simply acknowledge, the Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. Numbers 6:24-26. And this peace is not given to the future. It is not reserved for another place or another time. It is now, wherever you are, God is. Whatever appears, God is. Whoever stands before you, God is. Let this awareness go with you, not as a thought to remember, but as a quiet ground beneath your days. When judgment arises, let it pass. When reaction tempts, let it fade. When fear whispers, let it dissolve in stillness. Underneath are the everlasting arms. Deuteronomy 33-27. You are not required to hold life together. You are not required to defend truth. You are not required to manage outcomes. You are invited only to abide in love, abide in silence, abide in the gentle certainty that God is the only presence and the only power. And as you abide, you will find that life unfolds not perfectly according to human hope, but perfectly according to divine harmony. So we end where we have always been. in God, with God, as God's own expression, and all is well.